Okay, hello everyone. My name is Varad Deolankar. I'm a fourth year PhD student at the University of Michigan. First of all, thank you to the workshop organizers, Ken, Davide, and Minkyung for organizing the workshop and giving me the chance to present our paper. So this paper is titled The Impact of Engagement with User-Generated Content in Online Discussion Forums. This is joint work with Ali from the University of Washington, my advisor Sriram at the University of Michigan, and Pradeep from the University of Chicago. So the way I've organized the talk is first I'll give you some background and motivation for the problem explored. Then I'll show you some descriptive analysis. Then I'll come at the identification strategy. If time permits, briefly I'll talk about some text analysis. And then I'll conclude with the findings and potential implications. So let's begin. So over the last decade, online education platforms such as Coursera, Udemy, edX, all of these have experienced exponential growth. Now, what do these platforms do? They collaborate with academic institutions such as UCSD, as well as firms in the industry such as Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, and they offer short online courses on a host of different subjects ranging from physics, chemistry, science of well-being, sociology, machine learning, data science, engineering, so on. Now, an interesting feature of online education platforms is that on these platforms, the core product, which is the course material that's primarily available in the form of videos and readings, coexists with UGC or user-generated content that resides in the discussion forums of the courses offered on these platforms. Now, as a result of this coexistence, an interesting tension is developing in the edtech space, where on one hand, you have the proponents of UGC who argue that engaging with UGC can enhance the value that users derive from the core product. And on the other hand, you have the opponents of UGC who argue that engaging with UGC can potentially distract users from engaging with the core product. Now note that this coexistence is not a unique feature of online education platforms. Other platforms in other contexts also have coexistence of UGC and the core product. And hence this tension is something which carries over to other contexts as well. And quite recently, we've seen this tension play out in the context of news platforms. So if you dial back in time and think about news platforms from the early 2010s, you'd recall that news platforms consisted of news articles and op-eds that constituted the core product offered by these platforms, but these articles would be supplemented with the comments section, which is where the UGC would reside on these platforms. Now, fast forward a few years, in the mid 2010s, what happened is a lot of news websites got rid of the comments section, and they gave a bunch of reasons for doing that. One was they thought that engaging with UGC was potentially distracting the users from engaging with the core content that they wanted their users to consume. The other was that in the context of news platforms, the UGC consisted of a lot of arguments and negativity, toxicity, etc. So it had to be moderated by the platform, and moderating it was prohibitively costly for the platform at the time. But lately, even in the context of news platforms, there have been a flurry of voices that are saying that, hey, you know what, getting rid of UGC was a mistake because apparently that resulted in a drop in engagement, and drop in engagement is a big deal for news platforms because it translates into loss of ad dollars. So to reiterate, on one hand, if the proponents of UGC who argue that engaging with UGC can enhance the value that users derive from the core product, which would render the two forms of content that coexist as some form of complements. And on the other hand, you have the opponents of UGC who argue that engaging with UGC can potentially distract users from engaging with the core product, which would render the two forms of content that coexist as some form of substitutes. So in this paper, we first asked the question, how does engagement with UGC affect engagement with the core product? In our quest to answer this question, we also asked the question, how do properties of UGC affect a user's engagement with it? Now, I'll be a bit more clearer about what exactly I mean by properties of UGC once I've given you some more details about the research setting. But just to give you a sense of the setting explored in the paper, we've looked at the setting of Coursera. Coursera is a popular US-based online education platform. Our data come from 10 on-demand courses that were offered by a large public university. And our observation window is from January 2015 to March 2020. Now, if you dig into the literature on online education, a recurring theme you will find in this emerging literature is that student engagement and learning outcomes on online education platforms are poor. So motivated by these findings, researchers have tried to determine what are the determinants of engagement. And what they found is intrinsic traits of students are important determinants of engagement. And there have been some nice studies that have tried to gauge the extent to which these intrinsic traits are malleable through behavioral interventions. Now, an interesting feature of online education platforms is that the core product is available in the form of videos. So online education platforms generate tons of unstructured data. And with the recent advancements in unstructured data analysis tools, some recent studies have tried to analyze this data to figure out what are the predictors of engagement in online courses. Gamification is another active area of research where folks are trying to figure out how gamification can be embedded within the course design in order to improve engagement. And finally, researchers have also documented that payment can be used as a lever to improve user engagement in online courses. Now, when it comes to UGC or discussion forums in the context of online education, there are two broad ways in which the firm can influence engagement with UGC. One is they can nudge users to engage with forums, and two recent studies have capitalized on these nudges and demonstrated the effectiveness of these nudges in improving engagement. But there's something else which the firm can do, which is they can improve the attractiveness of the content that users encounter once they arrive at the UGC repository or the discussion forum. So in this paper, we identified 3 potential properties of UGC, which can be potential drivers of engagement with UGC, which we call popularity, relevance, and variety. And we believe that exploration along these lines can provide some insights about how firms should think about designing the UGC repository. Now, coming to this particular setting, before I delve into the data, some more institutional detail. So you can think of a course on Coursera as a sequence of modules. In each module, the user is expected to consume the course material that's primarily available in the form of videos. Now, an interesting feature of these courses is that there's a one-to-one mapping between modules and discussion forums. So each module has a separate forum where users can discuss and ask questions about topics covered in that particular module. At the end of the module, the user is expected to complete 1 or more assessments before they progress to the next module, and then this process continues until either the user drops off or they complete the course. Now, we make use of video consumption data to measure a user's engagement with the core product. We use clickstream data to measure a user's engagement with UGC, and we use information about student grades to measure a user's performance in a particular module or their learning outcome. Using these sources of information, we construct a panel where a unit of analysis is we have 1 observation per user in every module over the duration of their course journey. Now, let me show you some descriptive analysis. So here is what we observe in a typical module across the courses in our panel. On the left side, I'm showing you differences in engagement with the core product. On the right side, I'm showing you differences in learning outcome or performance. And what do we see? We see that there's a positive correlation between engagement with UGC and engagement with the core product as well as learning outcome. Now, it's tempting to interpret this difference as evidence of a causal relationship between engagement with the 2 forms of content, but there are several possible explanations for this observed correlation, which means there are several challenges before any causal claim can be made. So first is there's individual specific heterogeneity. So people differ in terms of unobservable attributes such as ability, intrinsic motivation levels, and users who engage more with UGC can thus be the ones who also engage more with the core product because of these unobservable attributes. And we do see heterogeneity across users in terms of their propensity to engage with UGC as well as their propensity to engage with the core product. Second is there's module specific heterogeneity. So modules within a course also differ in terms of traits such as difficulty levels, need for engagement, and so on. So modules within a course can differ in terms of their ability to foster engagement with the 2 forms of content. And that can explain the observed correlation that we just saw. Third is there could be potential confounding due to the age of the course on the platform. What I mean by this is there can be some time varying factors such as changes in course content, which we don't observe, that can induce a correlation between one's engagement with UGC and engagement with the core product. And here I'm showing you for one of the modules in one of the courses in our panel, there's a small increasing time trend in terms of a user's propensity to engage with UGC, their propensity to engage with the core product, as well as their learning outcome. Now, we intend to leverage the panel nature of our dataset and employ user fixed effects and course module week fixed effects to control for these potential sources of confounding as much as we can. But even if we can do that, one additional challenge will still persist, which will prevent us from making any causal claim, which is we wouldn't know what's causing what. So within a module, engagement with the core product can affect engagement with UGC, but our research objective is to isolate the impact of engagement with UGC on engagement with the core product. Now, why does this problem occur? It occurs because engagement with UGC is endogenous. So to address this challenge, what we need is shifter of engagement with UGC such that the shifter is exogenous to engagement with the core product, meaning it's uncorrelated with unobservable factors that affect engagement with the core product. Or in other words, you can think of this shifter as the only way in which the shifter should affect engagement with the core product should be through its effect on engagement with UGC. Now, this is an important challenge, but let's bench it for now. Let me first show you some descriptive findings, and then we'll come back to this challenge. So to do that, we estimate this regression where our dependent variable is engagement with the core product. That's operationalized as time spent by user I on module M's course material while learning that particular module. We have user fixed effects, course module, week fixed effects to address the first three challenges that I articulated earlier. Our main explanatory variable of interest is engagement with UGC, and that's operationalized as the number of threads viewed by user I and module M's forum while learning that particular module, which means our main parameter of interest is this beta, the marginal effect of one additional thread view on engagement with the core product. And we also control for the decision to visit the forum in a particular module. When we estimate this regression, is what we see. So moving from left to right, we are progressively adding more controls. Our preferred specification is column 3 and column 6, the full model specification. What do we see? We see that engagement with UGC is positively associated with engagement with the core product as well as the learning outcome. Now, at best, this was an interesting correlation. We still cannot make any causal claim. Why? Because we haven't addressed the fourth challenge. So to address that, we need an identification strategy, and that's what I'll elaborate upon now. So when a user arrives, user is learning a particular module and they decide to visit that module's forum, this is the page on which they land up. So here's what the forum homepage looks like. Now, I want you to notice two important features of this forum homepage. First is the default thread ranking algorithm. So by default, threads on the homepage are listed in the order of recency of their creation or the order of recency of their updation. What that means is that threads that have the most recent activity sit on top of the list. The other feature is pagination. So when a user arrives at the discussion forum, at most they can view 15 threads when they visit it. So in order to capture the properties of UGC that a user encounters when they arrive at the discussion forum, we define three measures that we believe can shift users' engagement with UGC, which we call popularity, relevance, and variety. Popularity is simply the sum of views of the threads that were listed on the homepage at the time of a user's visit. Relevance tries to gauge the appeal of topics spanned by the threads that were listed on the homepage. And variety attempts to measure the diversity of topics spanned by the threads that were listed. Now, for the sake of communication or illustration of the identification strategy, let's just work with a simple measure. The first one, popularity, which is simply the sum of views of the threads that were listed on the homepage at the time of a user's visit. Now, here's what I see when I plot the time series plot of popularity for one of the modules in one of the courses in our panel, and the plot is similar for other modules in other courses. What do we see? We see that evolution of popularity experiences sharp cliffs and sharp hills. Now, why are there these sharp cliffs and sharp hills? First, let's understand why there's a sharp cliff. A sharp cliff in popularity means that a thread with a very high number of views just left the forum homepage. Why would such a thread leave the forum homepage? There are two possible reasons. One is someone just creates a new thread, and the other is someone just updates an old thread with a much smaller view count. When either of these two events occur, what happens is that the new thread is now by definition the thread with the most recent activity. So by virtue of the default thread ranking algorithm, this new thread is to sit on top. But remember, the forum is paginated. So for this new thread to be able to sit on top, some old thread has to make way for it. And it just so happens that the thread that makes way for it is a thread with a high number of views. It leaves the forum homepage and popularity experiences a sharp cliff. Similarly, why does popularity experience a sharp hill? It's because this thread with a high number of views just entered the forum homepage because someone else just updates it. So the point I'm trying to make is that there exists exogenous variation in the composition of threads that a user encounters when they arrive at the discussion forum. Our goal then is to utilize this exogenous variation by constructing features that could be potential drivers of engagement with UGC. We use two modalities of data, numbers and text, to construct three features. So popularity we've spoken about in great depth. It's simply the sum of views of the threads that were listed on the homepage at the time of a user's visit. But you might have noticed when I showed you the homepage, users also see the different thread titles. So we leverage this fact to construct a corpus of these thread titles at the end of our observation window and estimate a topic model on this corpus to identify the topics that are spanned by these thread titles. And then use the output of the topic model to construct our text-based measures, which we call relevance and variety. Our ultimate objective is to then use these features or try to use these features as instrumental variables to identify the effect of engagement with UGC. Yes, Brad.
So if it's very popular and thread goes away, you might engage less with the threads, but it might also affect your performance at the end of the month, right? So there could be a direct effect of this on the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point. So with an IV strategy, you can never be 100% sure of whether the exclusion restriction holds. In a few slides, I'll show you some robustness checks. Hopefully that will address that. Yes.
Is there some kind of spillover between different users here? Because other users' engagement is user A's engagement is affecting user B's instrument. Does that cause any issues with the identification? You're trying to figure out for every individual user what is the impact of their engagement on their performance.
Yeah.
But then I'm using this composition of these threads as an instrument.
Yeah.
But the instrument of user A is affected by the engagement of users B, C, D, and F. So other users are affecting the focal user's instrument.
Okay.
And I don't know if is that an issue for identification.
So how would it manifest as an issue? Is what I'm trying to think.
Anything. I guess it depends on. Maybe I'll come back to this when you talk about it.
Okay, sure. Or we can talk about it all. Yeah. I'd love to hear your suggestions. Yeah.
This is a simple clarification question. When you say engagement, first you just assume that I need to engage with a particular topic for all of this topic. Or is it indeed any topics, any factors that focus on any aspect?
So any thread in a particular module. So each module has a separate forum. So in that module's forum.
And then when you show this ranking system, which kind of distributes outcomes, that's for one particular module.
Yeah, for that module's forum. Yeah. Because each forum will have a home page. Yeah. Next, I've already described how I've constructed the numeric feature. Next, I'll briefly go over the text analysis we did to construct our text-based measures. So to construct our text-based measure, we first constructed our corpus of thread titles at the end of the observation window. And then to gauge the topic spanned by these thread titles, we use a topic model. The topic modeling framework we employed is BERT topic. It's a newly developed topic model. In the interest of time, I had not planned on going into this in greater depth. But essentially, at the end of the topic modeling exercise, what we get is a document topic matrix, which in our context will be a thread topic matrix, where you can think of the rows of this matrix as the different threads. You can think of the columns of this matrix as the different topics which have been identified. You can think of the cell values as the probabilities of a thread belonging to those topics, which means you can interpret a row as the distribution of topics within a thread. Using this, we will construct our two measures, which we call relevance and variety. Just to give you a sense, here I'm showing you the topic coherence plot for one of the courses in our panel. So we estimate a topic model separately for each course. So for this particular course, 12 topics are identified. We have one topic about virtual machine installation. We have one topic about basis functions, which is a course concept covered in the course. We have one topic about quiz questions, doubts. And we have other topics like KI local, F local, which are the concepts covered in the course. Now I'll walk you through the math of how we constructed these text-based features by utilizing the output of the topic model. Hopefully I can communicate the intuition of what these features are trying to measure. So let TC be the set of threads in the forums of course C at the end of the observation period. Let SC be the set of topics which we've identified, like the 12 topics that I just showed you. For each topic, we first compute a topic quality score by combining two pieces of information across all threads. First is the distribution of topics across the thread, and second is the views accumulated by the thread at the end of the observation period. Once we've laid out this groundwork, then we are ready to define our two text-based measures. Here I'm just outlining the three measures once more. First is again, simply the sum of views of the threads that were listed on the homepage at the time of a user's visit. It's a simple numeric measure. The second measure, which is the first text-based measure, is relevance. It tries to gauge the appeal of topics or the attractiveness of topics spanned by the threads that were on the homepage at the time of visit. So it combines two pieces of information to get this relevance measure. First is distribution of topics by the set of threads on the homepage, and second is the topic quality score, which we just computed on the previous slide. And finally, we also use variety. For variety, we've used a standard measure in the literature, which is entropy. It characterizes the diversity of topics that have been spanned by the threads on the homepage while giving weight to both richness and evenness, as Wang Ying pointed out in a talk in the morning. Now here I'm juxtaposing the text-based measures with the numeric measure for the same module. And what do we see? We see that the text-based measure also has sharp cliffs and hills. Maybe not as sharp, but the point is that these measures also have the same exogenous variation that arises due to the design of the platform. We also see that the correlation between these measures is low, the raw correlation, which suggests that they're capturing varying sources of information. Now coming to the, yes.
Sorry, just a quick clarification question about that chart. So the story you told us sort of about, like a less popular piece of content, like happening to fall off of the first page. But given the time scale on this calendar, it looks like there's these like very sudden drops that last for like a month or two, and then very sudden spikes up after a month or two. So like that feels like it corresponds to a slightly different data generating process than the one in which like, every hour or so things are just randomly fluctuating. So do you know like what explains the spikiness?
Yeah, so it would depend on the kind of thread that's moving across pages. So here I use the sharp one just to make it clearer. But you can see that others are not as sharp, but those are also arising due to page switching.
So I guess are these just like threads that have been on the first page for like months and months and months and have like 60,000 comments or something, then they go away? Is that right?
For this module, yeah, that could be.
So, another possible interpretation, I don't know if it's true, is say new cohorts of students start at certain times, and maybe post threads that ultimately prove to not be very popular. So then the popular post gets knocked down. I guess I'm concerned about correlation between time and student characteristics.
Yeah, so that's why we have the module weak fixed effects in the regression.
But then wouldn't the identifying variation come from the variation here after controlling for weak fixed effects?
So the paper, there's actually a plot where I residualize these measures with the module weak fixed effect, and there you see those spikes and cliffs then clearly. Yes, sir.
Another thing I wanted to clarify. So my interaction with user-generated tokens here, is it me in the readers as comments, or is also me contributing?
So right now it's just viewing, but we do look at thread creation and thread contribution as well in our repository. So right now it's just viewing, clicking on.
I guess to understand that this relates to post question. To understand this data with process which generates this creation, be helpful. Like if some popular thread appears in the front page, what's a higher probability to start commenting more if that stays on the front page? But that's ultimately what you're using. Is it like there is two different universes, right? There is one universe where once a month someone makes a comment and that stays on the page for a while, and then because everyone reads that, and there is a different universe where everyone is engaging and talking about it. And I think in the second story, there's local correlation about performance and engagement. We'll have different engagement and possible create something more kind of once in a while there is someone posts. That makes sense.
Yeah. I think you're suggesting a way in which I can expose this correlation more clearly, right?
Yeah, let's explain what's going on here, because now it's kind of there's a black box of somehow people engage or don't engage, or there's some topics which appear at a particular time. And this for me, I struggle with understanding, okay, we'll try this, right? If there is a lot of variety, is it exams are coming and now those exams and everything else? Is it like These are the questions in my mind.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Maybe I can show a toy example for the evolution of the thread. I'll work on that. Thanks. Okay, coming to the result. So our objective is to identify the. Oh, sorry.
Anything actively pushed around that people are analysis and
Yeah.
do you have any idea how many threads there are for each module
Total?
on average?
Well, I observed the course from the start, right? So I observed it over the whole observation window. You want to know average across the whole observation window?
It's going inside the module. Threads that are.
Yeah.
How many do they sing? If there are only 5, then there's only people that are singing.
No, there are more than 5. I would say 300 or 400.
Then how many are active?
I haven't looked at that for the last. Maybe I should.
I think that's over.
Yeah.
How often popular threads are shifting differently?
Got it.
I just want to ask a question related to this. I guess I don't know fully the nature of the UGC on these modules, but have you thought about looking at like the toxicity of the comments? Or so this is related to your framing of the thread, but I'm imagining these really long threads, like people don't have really long conversations that are happy visually, and like that might impact how you also think about what these instruments are doing. If some of these topics are just like people blaming each other versus like constructive conversation.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that part of the data yet, but I want to. Thanks.
Yeah, I feel like that whether it's moderated or whether there's an upvotes or downvote system, it's so interesting.
There is an upvote system, but that information only revealed once you select into. It's not revealed on the board.
So every time a user within a module week, every time a user logs in, they see some thread composition which has a particular variety. But your instrument is at the user module week level. So do you average over all these views? How does it?
Yeah. So I think what you're asking is within a module, the user can visit multiple times, right?
Within a module week.
Yeah, they can visit multiple times, right? So right now I'm just looking at the first visit. I'm running with the idea that first impression matters. But in a robustness check, I will just look at single visits. There are some instances where you can visit. Okay. So our objective is to identify the impact of engagement with UGC on engagement with the core product. But the problem is engagement with UGC is endogenous. So to address this challenge, we've found a plausibly exogenous source of variation, which is a state of the forum that user encounters based on the design of the forum of the platform. Our objective is to then capture the properties of UGC that a user encounters by these 3 measures, which we call popularity, relevance, and variety, and then use these as instrumental variables. For that, they should satisfy a few conditions. One is relevance, that is, they should sufficiently shift engagement with UGC, and the other is the exclusion restriction to which Brett alluded earlier. That is, we should be sure that the only way in which the instruments affect engagement with the core product is through this effect on engagement with UGC. There's a direct effect, then the exclusion restriction would be violated. So let me first show you the results, then I'll come to the robustness check. So relevance is testable, so we estimate the first stage. And what do we see? We see that popularity and relevance are relevant, but I'm not finding an effect of variety on engagement with UGC. Also, the stats on the 2 excluded instruments which qualify are suggest that we shouldn't be worried about weak instrument problem. And then when we use the 2 instruments to estimate the second stage in the 2SLS procedure, what we see is that engagement with UGC positively affects engagement with the core product as well as positively shifts performance. Now, the crucial assumption on which this analysis is again the validity of the exclusion restriction. How likely is it that the only way in which the state of the forum affects engagement with the core product is through the effect on engagement with UGC? Now, to think about that, what I do is we conjecture about the mechanisms driving the effect in the first stage. So why does state of the forum that a user encounter affect engagement with UGC? Well, the obvious mechanism is the state of the forum signals something about the quality of the UGC, and that's the reason it shifts engagement with UGC. But if the state of the forum is interpreted as signaling something about the quality of the course material, then one can hypothesize that there's a direct effect of the state of the forum on engagement with the core product. And if that happens, then, well, we're in trouble. Exclusion restriction is violated. So what we do is we first recognize there are three types of users in a module based on their visits. Those who don't visit the forum and thereby don't engage with any UGC. Those who visit the forum but don't engage with UGC. And roughly 8% observation, 8% instances this happens. And those who do both, visit the forum and engage with UGC. Now we focus on this subsample, which is those who visit but don't engage. Now these guys visited, meaning they knew the state of the forum, or we can assume they knew the state of the forum, but they didn't engage. So for this subsample, we should observe a relationship between engagement, between the state of the forum and engagement with the core product. If the state of the forum signals something about the quality of the course material. But we don't, and that sort of alleviates our concern about the validity of the exclusion restriction. The second point, as Imad was suggesting, that within a module week, user can visit multiple times. So we look at the single instance visits where they visit just once, and we find that effects become slightly stronger. Now, another problem is that there's heavy attrition. So not every enrollee in the course completes the course. People drop off. And once they drop off, we don't observe their behavior. Also, those who drop off are likely to be systematically different than those who persist. So the estimates I showed you are probably a combination of two things. One is the effect of engagement with UGC. The other is the selection problem. So what we do is we verify robustness on subsamples stratified by the percentage of course completed. So we estimate the model on subsample of users who complete at least 10% of the course, subsample of users who completed at least 20% of the course, and so on. We see that the estimates shrink, but they still remain positive and significant, which suggests that the parameter estimates do reflect changes in behavior to a certain extent. And finally, as I believe Andre asked, we also considered an alternative measure of engagement with the forum, which is instead of just looking at thread views, we also looked at thread creations and thread contributions to existing threads, and we found similar results. So, are
you going to discuss monotonicity?
So what's the concern exactly?
So if you want to interpret this as a local activity,
Yeah.
you need monotonicity to apply. Basically, the instrument should shift the treatment and state it.
Yeah, it should affect everyone.
And you also need to describe who are the compliers, what is the complier population.
But from observational data, how do I parse it out?
I mean, you have to argue.
Okay.
You can't verify it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I guess related to about the monotonicity assumption, like in addition to the different types of engagement that I'm mentioned being a robustness check, like I can imagine that the effect of using different types of engagement with different types of content could be different. So like I can very easily imagine like posting and like actually being an active participant having positive effects, just reading a lot having negative effects, for instance. So it might be, it seems like all of your results are consistent, but it seems like it might be worth digging into that.
Yeah.
Maybe help us monotonicity assumptions.
Yeah, I agree. I want to explore along those lines. Look at the content, how content related characteristics can have different effects. That's something I want to explore. Thanks.
Were there any courses where there was like a big student revolt and they started a long thread about how the teaching stuff? Definitely.
I haven't found anything, but I'll look.
One way to maybe verify some of this, it also gets a different thing, but when you say that in the robustness check, when you let people who remove this forum, you could do it for instance. Just check it if that shell, if it will do is stable over time, because when you do this check, one thing you rely on is it's the same proportion, the same type of people who select into the behavior with different IVs which shift everything, which might not be the case. So one thing is just to verify is the case. You're gonna sort of verify, but see if it's the same proportion. Okay. And it also will help you to understand a bit more. Is it about how many people actually engage. So understand this process of engaging people, comments, people within, that's given us a bit more about that.
Thanks. I'll look at it. So to conclude, so far in this project, what I found is engagement with UGC positively affects engagement with the core product, which suggests that in the context of online education platforms, there's at least a one-way complementarity between these two forms of content that coexist. Along the way, I've also found that popularity and relevance of UGC presented upfront matters. It does shift engagement with UGC. So apart from nudging, platform design is a key lever which platforms must utilize when they think about organizing their content repositories. To conclude this work in progress, what I wanted to say is what excites me most about this project is the ubiquity of the coexistence of the core product and UGC. So in a context like gaming, you can think of the core product as a game that's offered by a firm like Zapac. You can think of UGC as the discussion which the gamers on this platform have about different topics such as the game, strategies in a game, characters in a game, so on. And in the context of fitness platforms, you can think of the core product as the content produced by these platforms about lifestyle advice, workout regimes, nutrition tips, and so on. And you can think of UGC as the discussions which the fitness enthusiasts on this platform have among themselves about how to gain muscle mass, how to lose fat, both of which I want to do, and what kind of diet recipes to follow. So to conclude, so far in this paper, what we've done is we recognize core product coexists with UGC. There can be spillover effects of engaging with one form of content on the other form of content, and understanding this spillover effect can produce some useful insights on how firms should think about organizing the content reviews. That's it. That's all I had.
In muscle mass.
Okay, I can give you some. Okay, a lot of questions. Maybe I can help clarify some of them. We'll see. Thank you, organizer, for allowing me to organize and discuss the papers. So I'm going to try to summarize briefly how I view this paper, and then I'm going to discuss 4 points about the paper. I already discussed all these points with Varad, and a few more, but since you don't have much time, I'm going to focus on 4 of them. Okay, so research question. I think the big research question is how does the design of MOOCs impact user engagement? And in the context of this talk is basically 2 consumptions. Consumption of Coursera discussion forums content, increase course engagement and readings. Okay, when they say consumption, for the paper look is basically clicks to these threads that Varad discussed a few minutes ago. Why is important? Varad already mentioned it, but MOOCs in general growing is a sector that is growing very fast. Probably the pandemic accelerated this growth, and a lot of universities and students use this kind of platforms. How does Coursera work? This is the figure from the paper. They divide every course in module. On the top, you will have course material. In the middle, you have the discussion forums that are supposed to increase engagement. Okay, so the basic question, which is an hard one because of how the forum, how the modules are designed, is whether discussion forums impact course material. But of course, because they're on the same page and consumer interact with both of these parts, teasing apart these effects is very hard. Data, how they do so, they have click stream data. The dependent variable is time spent on course module and performance. Related to discussion forum engagement, they have a bunch of information about creating new thread, and information to threads, and the number of threads that consumer click on, that is basically determined in the paper one. Okay, which I call also content consumption. As I mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, identification is very hard. Simultaneity seems to be likely an issue. Engagement with the forum affect course engagement and vice versa. And of course, there are also unobserved module characteristics that are correlated with consumption. You can expect that a more difficult course will have higher forum engagement. So what do the authors do? The education strategy rely on a large set of fixed effects to account for user and course time varying and a weekly level heterogeneity, which accounts for, for this heterogeneity we are worrying about consumers and the course itself. But we still need to address simultaneity, and the authors decided to go for an instrumental variables approach. Okay. How does this instrument work? As Varad just showed you, this is the snapshot of how a thread looks like. Threads are ranked in the forum. Different ranks, the assumption is that different ranks affect forum attractiveness and therefore engagement. The authors measure forum attractiveness in 3 different ways. One is basically popularity, which is based on views, and the other 2 are kind of a weighted average of what the topic are talking about, the extract topic information using BERT. What is the main assumption here is that forum rank, or the state of the forum, is as if random with user due to random arrival. The time at which the user arrived to the forum is exogenous, and user activity that changes the rank of this forum because they're based on recency. Okay. If you believe the assumption that everything is straightforward, we estimate as well as called, and we get our positive effect of engagement on course, time spent on the course, and performance. Okay. So let's go over my discussion points. I'm going to focus on 4 points: the paper motivation, spend a little bit of time on the instrumental variable, exclusion restriction. I'll discuss one of the robustness check that Varad just mentioned, and then I have more of a comment and a question. I'm a new professor, I can do this thing. Okay, paper motivation. The author motivate this paper as a problem of whether these forum are a substitute or complement for content, the time spent on the course itself. It is not immediately clear why someone would pay to do a course on Coursera and then spend most of his time on the forum rather than on the course. So I think it seems to me, personal opinion, that a plot of design seems more appropriate as a motivation for this this paper, and basically try to understand whether the way in which Coursera design its courses helps with engagement and performance in the main product. Second point, of course, is the instrumental variable. We are not talking about causality. This is the man. If you listen to the idea, we need to use DAGs to try to understand what's going on in these models. So that's what they're going to do. Okay. That's the classic situation where we face all the time with observational data. Now we have our outcome, which is the module, our main variable that we care about, which is clicks, basically. And we have a bunch of unobserved co-founders, think about course quality, how difficult is the course, you name it. In addition, we have this reverse causality effect. Right? So how we deal with all these things, an approach that we are all familiar with is to just instrument for X. In this case, we're going to instrument using this form of attractiveness. Right? And now we have to think about what is randomizing this, and there were a couple of questions in the room. There are two things that need to happen. That we need to get user time of arrival, and then there should be user activity. User activity means both clicking on these threads and both contributing to these threads, because they're going to change basically the measure that Varad is creating. One important caveat that I don't know if was clear from the talk is that the data is aggregated the user module week, which basically means that there is one observation per user per week per module. So this instrument works by randomizing basically the attractiveness of the first time the user see the model. It cannot be that, so basically we cannot see the same user multiple times, the same model in the same week, because then we're going to have an issue, right? Because these are basically, this is a subset of this. The first round clicks, but then basically there is a loop, right? Follow subsequent round, the user itself can affect the status of the thread, which is a better activeness. There is a loop that we want to avoid. So this aggregation helps avoid the loop. But still, of course, many things can do, right? And so we need to find a way to convince the readers that this is not the case. I do think the authors do quite a good job to try to argue why user time of arrival is likely exogenous, even though I think you should show more data about the arrival of these users and show that, doesn't follow some patterns that may be correlated with the course quality, for example, or the course difficulty. But I do think that to spend some more time in convincing the reader that the user activity is not a problem. In particular, because it seems very straightforward that user activity is correlated with some course characteristic that may and therefore may get affect time span relevant. Another point that I think is a discussion, QSLS estimates are larger than the OLS. These are 90% of the cases, and most of the time people argue for measurement error. I don't know if it is the case in these particular settings, but I think you want to spend some time discussing why the OLS estimates should be downward biased. Okay? Because it's not trivial and it's not clear to me. Finally, well, the third point is this additional test that Varad shows that basically he ran the reduced form regression, basically the instrument, he regressed the instrument directly on the outcome on a subset of users that do not click on that visit the forum but do not click on a thread, and they see no correlation, which is great. But as Andre mentioned, I think these users can be very, very different, or arrive where the state of the forum is different. Maybe the forum is always unattractive when the user arrives, right? So can you make this test stronger? Yes, assuming that you have some characteristics about the user and the forum itself. You want to match this subsample of users that do not click with a sample of users that click. And then you want to show that the reduced form regression is actually still positive for this sample user. If you can do this, I think this is going to be a stronger test than what you have right now, right? Because you basically have the same users based on some observable characteristics, of course, and these users should still be responding. So the instrument should be correlated. And finally, a question about the model. This is not exactly the question you present, but in the paper there is this equation, which basically we have on the left-hand side, we have the outcome. On the right-hand side, we have a V, which is an indicator for whether the consumer visit the forum, and if you visit the forum, then we have the number of clicks, right? But E exists only for consumers for which V is equal 1, which make me, for what I understand, the question should be something like this, right? Because this doesn't exist for when V is equal 0. And so if I'm correct, I may be wrong, then it seems to me that you need two instruments, which makes things more complicated. In the sense, you basically want to model also these selections. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's everything I have to tell you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Davide, for the awesome comments. Yeah, there's a lot more work to be done on this project, and quite a few of you gave a lot of ideas which I want to test out, especially the one where students revolt. That seemed interesting. Regarding the last point about endogeneity of the decision to visit the forum, modeling selection into visiting the forum itself, that will be a harder route to take. We did discuss that. But here, so far, what we're just showing is that among those who visit and those who are induced to engage more with the forum by virtue of random exposure to a forum in a more attractive state, they engage more with the core product. So that's the key evidence we want to focus on so far. But if that's the route you have to go, then yeah, more work would be necessary. And lastly, just want to thank everyone for the suggestions. I will work harder on this.